Hey you Bookaholics, welcome back to my channel. This is Angela, your own Bookaholic brown name. If this is your first time here and you're wondering what this channel is all about, in this channel I talk about books that I have read, books that I'm planning to read, books that I am reading currently, and all things related to books. So if you're a bookaholic like me, please do not hesitate from subscribing to my channel, and also please like, share and comment while you're at it. Today's topic is a review of a book that I recently read, which is The Stranger by Albert Camus. So without further ado, let's get into it. Albert Camus was a French philosopher, author, and journalist. He won the Nobel Prize in the year 1957 at the age of 44, and he was the second youngest recipient in history. Camus' philosophical views have contributed substantially towards the development of the philosophy of absurdism. And now I have a two-sentence understanding of the philosophy of absurdism. And with that limited knowledge, I could find definitely elements of absurdism in this novel. But more about that later on. The book was published in 1942. It is too long to be called a short story and too short to be called a novel, so let's go with the term novella. And inconspicuously, the name of the translator is missing from this edition, which is good to preserve the reputation of the translator, considering the shoddy job he has done in doing it, because I have some issues with the translation in here. Before I get into my detailed review of the book, I would like to say that while I understand that this book is laden with philosophical undertones and subtext, because of the fact that I am an absolute stranger to philosophy as a whole, as a subject, I will steer clear of any philosophical analysis of the book. Most part of the review is my highly subjective, reactive opinion, and some part of it is my earnest attempt to objectively look at the themes and motives embedded in the plot. The premise of the story, I am giving you a very short summary of what goes on in the book. I might end up omitting some important points that were not that relevant to how I'm going to review the book. So to understand the book completely, please read the book. So the entire book is told from the perspective of Misso, our protagonist. Now Misso receives a telegram of saying that his mother, who was enrolled in a home or a shelter for the elderly, has passed away. So he takes the bus and goes to the funeral, and during the entire journey he is asleep. And once he reaches there, he meets the president of the home or the shelter where his mother was placed, and strike up a conversation. There is a whole night vigil, and this president of the home gives him company, which he quite does not like, because he just wants to be left alone. And he is tired, he has lots and lots of coffee and then during the morning arrives, and people are actually wondering why he is not crying, why he is not showing any emotion, because that's how he comes across as. There is kind of a march from the place where the mother's body is preserved now to where it will be buried. And during the walk, because of the summer heat, Maso faints and he cannot remember much of the funeral. After the funeral, he happily comes back to his home in Algiers, and he resumes his normal life, and he goes to swimming the next day in the public beach, and there he meets a woman called Marie Cotona, and he asks her out for a movie date, and she agrees, and they go on a movie date to a comedic movie just a day after his mother has passed away. They have a good time there, and the next day he goes to work and business as usual. And after his work, he meets several neighbors, and one of the neighbors is Raymond Sintes. I think that's how his name is pronounced. Anyway, this guy is unpopular, and he is known as a pimp. Now he is fuming, he is angry because he just caught his mistress cheating on him red-handed. So he wants to teach her a lesson. So he asks for Misso's help in teaching her a lesson. So he asks if Misso can write a letter to her so that he can lure her in and give her the punishment that she deserves. And our wonderful protagonist agrees, because what better noble act than agreeing to help a woman beat a piece of shite? I mean, why not? Bros before, well, he continues dating Marie, and Marie brings up the topic of marriage, and he says that he doesn't think they should get married, and he's quite indifferent about it. And then he says, okay, fine, if you want to get married, let's go and get married. He's quite indifferent about it, whether you get married or not. So the next weekend after this loose engagement, they decide they're invited to go to a beach house, which belongs to Raymond's friend Mason. I think that's how it's pronounced, or Mason. Let's call him Mason. Now, they go there, and Mason and Mason's wife, Raymond, and obviously Misso and Misso's girlfriend. So, Marie. So they have a good time during the morning in the beach. They swim, they have nice time in the beach, and then they go back to the beach house for lunch. And after lunch, Misso and Raymond decide to take a walk. And during the walk, they come across a couple of Arabs, and one of the Arabs happened to be uh, Raymond's mistress brother. What are the chances, right? So there an encounter ensues, and Raymond pulls out a gun to shoot at these guys, and at that point, Misso intervenes and he stops him from doing anything extreme. And they head back to the beach house and to cool down. After some time, Misso decides that he needs to go back alone and take a walk, and just have some time alone. And during his walk, Misso comes across these guys again, and out of the blue, without any reason, he just starts shooting at this guy who is um, Raymond's mistress's brother, multiple times, I think 5 times, and he's dead on spot. And Misso is caught and he's put in prison. And then a lot of things happen, but the main thing that needs notice is he has a conversation with the magistrate about religion and faith, which he denies. He says that he's a rational person, he doesn't believe in God and religion, etc. And then the trial ensues, and during the trial also he is quite indifferent, and people are quite appalled at his apparent absence of guilt and remorse. And also during the trial, the prosecuting side brings up the fact that he just went on a date and had a grand time with his girlfriend, watching comedic movie and swimming, etc., just a day after his mother, and to prove how callous and indifferent and cruel this person is. Obviously, he is found guilty and he is sentenced to be executed by beheading, and then he's put back into prison. And that's when he comes to term with his fate. And there is a small encounter with a chaplain. After that encounter, he realizes that the human existence holds no meaning in the grand scheme of things. He equates himself to the indifference of universe, and that's how he is. So once he accepts this fact, the gentle indifference of the universe, he is ready to face his imminent death, because he understands that his existence as such holds no special meaning in this universe. And that's how the story ends. I hope I have condensed this story into a short summary as quickly, as briefly I could, and I hope you got the gist of what this story is all about. Just a few words about the narrative perspective that is maintained throughout the story. The entire story is told from the perspective of a protagonist, Misso, and most of the time in real time as it happens, except for the time where he recounts his trial when he is locked up back in his jail cell. Now, Misso to me comes across as an unreliable narrator. He is constantly zoning out or fainting or sleeping. And precisely due to this, we cannot rely on him entirely to paint the complete picture of the happenings. Also, is his constantly fading mental presence. Is it an indication of any illnesses that he may have, or a result of a seemingly indifferent attitude towards what happens to those around him? those are questions still open, and I couldn't find an answer to those. Once he is incarcerated, he still tries to stay upbeat by thinking that there are people in worse situation than him. The story does gives us an insight into what prison life does to humans. Now, he or Maso thinks of this in two stages. First is the free man's thought, and the second is the prisoner's thought. During the initial days in the prison, one might think and act like a free person. For example, unwittingly deciding that he needs to take a stroll on the beach and then suddenly realizing that he is not free to do so. And as and when time progresses, slowly the state and the reality of loss of freedom settles into the human mind, and that's when the prisoner get accustomed to the prisoner's thought process. That means he has a routine that he needs to follow, there is a timetable he needs to follow, and he becomes a true prisoner in mind and body. Maso's indifference and complete lack of remorse is evident in the way he dozes off during moments that needs his attention, and also the way he focuses on the mundane, like the color of the judge's robe or whether there are fans provided to the ones present in the trial. The first time he realizes he is guilty is only when he sees the indignation with which others present in the trial or the courthouse are staring at him. He has no regrets, and he defends that by saying that he lives in the present and focuses on the immediate future, and the past has no place for his concern. Now, this would look like a seemingly perfect principle to live by until we take into consideration the fact that what if everybody in the world lived by that principle? Where will we be as a community if we can easily dispense away with our moral responsibility in such a callous way? Now, throughout the book, I found many uncomfortable scenarios. For example, the violence against men, the utter carelessness with which the law enforcement was acting, and many scenarios that played out in the courthouse during the trial. Now, one rather uncomfortable symmetry that I would like to point out is the time where the prosecuting side equated the murder that Maso committed out of utter callousness with a parasite or son killing a father. I found that quite of a stretch and over dramatic from the prosecuting side to put across his point this way. It's fun to look at the very first notes that I made about Maso while I was reading this book initially, during the part one of the book, and let me just read them out to you. Lazy, nonchalant, unempathetic, self-centered, awkward, inappropriate, condescending, insensitive. I hate this guy. Stagnant, no ambition, didn't want to see his mother's face, doesn't seem particularly sad about his mother's demise. If not for his mother's death, he could have gone for a walk and enjoyed the weather. So these are the things that I noted initially while I was reading the book. But is it really those things that I noted down here? Now, because the story is told from the perspective of Maso, who is definitely unreliable, because there are gaps in his story and he is definitely not very forthcoming about his feelings. So we cannot help but make some assumptions, and instead of answers, we come up with many more possibilities about what is causing him act the way he is acting. Now, initially, in general, as a society, we are completely appalled by his actions, his indifference, his willingness to help, his neighbor who wants to, assault basically his mistress. But is it fair on our part to judge him on the basis of how he chose to mourn his mother's death? I, for one, had a personal experience when my mother passed away. Somebody very close to me judged, or actually many people might have judged the way I handled it publicly, because I don't like crying in public, and I was in a faraway place when I got the news that my mother passed away. So I had to take a 12-hour journey in a bus, and I grieved then because I didn't want to show my emotions in front of others. So by the time I reached home, I was holding my tears back, and I grieved when others were not looking, because I'm quite embarrassed and I don't like people sympathizing with me. So, yes, so every person has a different way of grieving. So maybe his constant um, fainting, his stressful demeanor, his indifference, his um, way of avoiding the topic of his mother. So these might be his way of mourning. So who are we to judge how a person should react to a particular situation as a society? I don't think we should create templates for how people should behave in various situations. And that's my take after thinking back on the story, because initially I was quite judgmental about the way he acted, Maso. But I think we should think from his shoes, and also from the perspective that people are just different. Even though in many occasions he comes across as callous, indifferent, and selfish, a deeper look into his actions and behaviors would reveal his outright honesty is the real culprit. I mean, when his girlfriend asks him if he wants to get married, and the magistrate asks him if he is willing to repent and confess, he refuses. And during his encounter with the chaplain, he still refuses to accept religion. So until his last moment, he is very faithful and honest towards his feelings. He is way too rationalizing in his reasons for his actions. But rationality devoid of sensitivity, what good does it do? There's a lot more that I can talk about this book and Merceau, but I will stop here. Through the story of this indifferent, callous, and selfish, and possibly psychopathic and definitely sociopathic man called Merceau, Camus tells us a very many truths and dishes out even more food for thought and further pondering. And it is no wonder that even after decades of its first publishing, philosophers and laymen alike read it, debate, and deliberate about the meaning of this brief story. I will leave you with a brief reading of the last part of this book. Before I do the reading of the last part of this book, I have to say there are many points that I wanted to talk about: his treatment of women, his treatment of his friends, many things, many things that I wanted to talk about from a very non-philosophical point of view, but I couldn't, because then this video would be like 1 hour long or so, and I didn't want that. So let me get into the reading and wind this up. Almost for the first time in many months, I thought of my mother, and now it seemed to me I understood why at her life's end she had taken on a fiancé, why she had played at making a fresh start. There, too, in that home where lives were flickering out, the dusk came as a mournful solace. With death so near, mother must have felt like someone on the brink of freedom, ready to start life all over again. No one in the world had any right to weep for her. And I too felt ready to start life all over again. It was as if that great rush of anger had washed me clean, emptied me of hope, and gazing up at the dark sky spangled with its signs and stars, for the first time, the first, I laid my heart open to the benign indifference of the universe. To feel it so like myself, indeed so brotherly, made me realize that I'd been happy and that I was happy still. For all to be accomplished, for me to feel less lonely, all that remained to hope was that on the day of my execution there should be a huge crowd of spectators, and that they should greet me with howls of execration. So that was my very brief, non philosophical review of The Stranger by Albert Camus.